the time right. It took 14 emails for you to get it right. Nobody is on here to hear what I've got to say. What I would like, I think it's only appropriate that we open with the Scout Oath and Pledge, and I've asked Brian Chessels, who is our NST 7 commissioner, to do that for us. So, Brian, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Ben. If you guys will, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in the Scout Oath. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight.
Thank you, Brian. Well, I thank all of you. Thanks everybody for joining us. It's a good crowd, and I suspect will continue to grow as the evening goes on. Thanks, Colonel Fossum and Mr. Cooper, very much for joining us. We don't usually have two speakers. Often we don't have any speakers. We yell at each other and talk and figure out what we're going to do here for the scouts and the kids. But I think everybody has seen the email I've sent about Colonel Fossum's background and Mr. Cooper's background. So without any ado at all, I'm just going to turn it over to Colonel Fossum and we'll go from there. So Colonel Fossum, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much. We're just thrilled you're here with us.
Oh, you bet. You bet. No, no place I'd rather be. And I did salute during the pledge because I am in uniform. Just want to show I keep it in my office. And I also like to show off the patches. All scouts like patches, and so do astronauts. And indeed, I've started a tradition with the Maritime Academy here that every year we sail our summer sea term. We get a patch to commemorate the summer sea term. I started this a few years back, and so I've got 500 cadets on the ship. Been out at sea for almost 70 days on their last leg back to Houston or back to Galveston right now. You know, I know a lot of you. But I consider everybody here to be brothers and sisters because you know we serve. I mean, an incredibly worthy cause. I appreciate all of you for all you do for scouting. Help me out. I'm not familiar with the National Service Territory. What is the range of this now? I haven't kept up with some of the reorg stuff.
Sure. We did away with the regions. There used to be 4 regions, and each region, of course, as you know, and we were in the southern region, and we had then we're broken up into 12 areas. They've done away with all of that, Colonel Fossum, and now we have 16 National Service Territories.
Okay.
This is about the 5th biggest in the country and covers the entire state of Louisiana. We have several Louisianans on the line with us, and the southern half of Texas. So we have about 60,000 scouts and about 10,000 volunteers.
Okay, so the southern half of Texas over into Louisiana?
Yes, sir. All of Louisiana.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. For our Louisiana folks, our ship was in New Orleans. We got there last Wednesday, and I was with the ship until Saturday there. So, yeah. Anyway, just really, and I hope that we could. I'll start off by kind of tell a little bit about my story, and then Wade, I think you'll do the same, and then I'd love to get in a conversation there. I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, all the way South Texas, and it was a very different time, growing up in the 60s. Joined scouting with, the Cub Scouting with all of, the neighborhood boys, and my mom was our den mother, an archaic term now, of course, but all of for the younger Cubs, all of them were den mothers, were moms back in those days. Simpler time, more innocent time. But I was attracted into scouting, and kind of just got in doing things with friends, and some of my best friends today are the friends that I made through scouting and through service and through the Order of the Arrow and serving on camp staff together. And really, and Chris Boswell's here. He was our lodge chief and then the national chief. As a youth, we were on camp staff together. Grew up in different parts of the Rio Grande Valley, but we're united through scouting, and that's what scouting does. It was a rough area. There were, there was a lot of things going on. When I got into Boy Scouts, when I turned 11, I ran into trouble. I ran into some bad attitudes, some bullies, and I after a few months I quit. It was really the love of one scout leader, my Webelos leader, who had gone on to be an assistant scoutmaster in a different troop than the one I joined, heard I'd dropped out, and he dogged me. Today he'd probably be questioned for stalking or something, because he'd come looking for me. The neighborhood pool was at the end of his street, and I lived about 3 blocks away, and he'd come down and look through the chain link to see if I was in the pool. If he saw me, he'd come in there and he'd talk to me about scouting. And I'd walked away. I don't need this. I don't need this kind of harassment. But I shared with him some of my reasons, and he kept trying to convince me. Many years later, I found out that he was going, sometimes when he'd come by the pool, I'd see him and I'd kind of duck under the water or something. I thought he didn't see me. But what he did was verify I was at the pool, and he'd continue walking down and talk to my parents. They never shared that until many years later. Then I found out he was also talking to the leaders of my troop about the problems I was describing. As my mom shared later, she said he kept saying, we've got to get Mike back in Scouts. And I was a stubborn, ornery kid, and my parents really didn't understand the value of it, and so they didn't try to talk me into something I didn't want to do. Eventually, after being out about 6 months or so, I promised him, okay, I'll go back and give it a try. And I found out the bullies were gone. They'd been shown the door, and I started having fun, and started having the kind of fun that a young boy wants to have, and I enjoyed it. And so I stayed in. I says, this is, I'm having fun now. And the kind of, adventures that we enjoy. And because of that, my 2 younger brothers all joined scouting. We all became Eagle Scouts. We all became leaders raised Eagle Scout sons, and became leaders in the communities in which we live around the country, all because of one man who wouldn't give up. And I can never repay Mickey Allen for what he did for me. He passed away a couple of years ago during kind of the height of COVID. I can't, and I've never been able to pay him back. And so I'm compelled to pay it forward, by continuing to support the program. And I've really been a volunteer since I turned 18. I stayed active in the Order of the Arrow while I was in college, and have been an active volunteer in the units while I was in the service, and then eventually settled here in Houston for almost my entire adult life. And I would, summarize the scouting and really the emphasis, particularly for the younger ones, with fun, friends, and adventure. That's what the youth are looking for. The young ones, the Cubs, the Webelos, the young scouts. They're looking for fun, friends, and adventure. Too much of the time, we put too much emphasis on advancement. Personally, I think one of the worst things that scouting did was try to say that every scout needs to be first class within the first year. That's a lot of pressure. They're not really interested in going to school again at night when they've been in school all day. But if you give them, adventures, things that they can do, that they can, get some bragging rights for climbing a hill, climbing a mountain, someday going to Philmont, things like that, learning how to light a fire for them by themselves, learn how to cook their first meal by themselves on a fire, those kind of things. They're having fun with friends, and to just fun, friends, and adventure keep them going back. It's the buddies that keep them coming back. Later, you feed in the advancement, you have a program that gives them the opportunity, and of course, things like that, you know, and you encourage it. But, you know, and I really tell parents, when I was a Scoutmaster for 12 years here in Houston. I couldn't run a university campus, and which I've been doing for the last 6 years here at Texas A&M in Galveston, and effectively run a troop. But I would tell the parents when they'd come visit, because a lot of the parents, I mean, they're there to put Eagle on a college application, and I would tell them point blank, I'm not here to make your son an Eagle Scout. And they would look at you and say, no, I've got a bigger goal in mind. I'm here to help prepare your son to internalize the values of scouting and prepare him for the adult world, to prepare him be a person of integrity, solid moral character, a person who's ready to be a leader in our communities, our country, you know, and the world. That's what I'm here for. We celebrate Eagle, but it's not all about Eagle. It's really not all about Eagle. And of course, you know, when I let them know that, of course, we'll help your child on the way to Eagle if that's what he wants, then we're here to help him and you know, encourage and support. But I'm not here to help you, mom and dad, force him to earn Eagle at any age. But you know, I think that the thing that stands out at me, you know, now at the end of you know, after many years with the program, is it's really about the values. It's about the values. It's about respect for the flag, the Pledge of Allegiance. It's about the shared values that we espouse through the Scout Oath and the Scout laws. That, you know, as a youth, repeating those over and over and over, and within scouting, holding them accountable to these values, giving them the opportunity to grow as a leader, to make mistakes where it's contained, where it's safe. And, you know, they make mistakes, but learning to accept responsibility, to be accountable, to follow through, to make things happen, to learn how to lead a patrol, to learn how to lead a troop. All those things they're life skills, because leadership is not, you know, you can't really learn it out of books. You learn it by experiencing it and having adult mentors that help them. And that's what I loved about being a Scoutmaster, was helping train the new senior patrol leaders. Almost all of them reluctant, almost all of them scared and nervous, and giving them the encouragement, the safe place, and helping them grow. And then with such incredible joy to see as they move on from their stage of, you know, running around the woods with a burning stick to, you know, to going off to school. Is scouting still important today? I mean, it's important to me. It's still on my resume. It was part of my astronaut interview when I was selected as an astronaut, when I was on the astronaut selection committee for two of the classes we hired. That's one of the questions I asked when I'm screening. In 2017, we had 18,000 applicants for astronaut. We picked 12 in the end. And as you're looking through those, you're looking for signs of excellence and scouting experience, particularly, you know, distinguishing themselves by achieving Eagle or Gold or Quartermaster at that young age is one of the few things that you know really can carry on your professional resume that people notice. I noticed it when we got an Eagle Scout or Gold Scout into the well, particularly Eagles. I don't actually remember getting any Gold Scouts in to the interview, but I'd always ask them, you know, what was your Eagle Scout project? You know, and by that time, they've done schools, they've done pilot training, test pilots, medical doctors, PhDs, lots of things. And here we are talking about their youth. What did you do? What did you learn? Now, it didn't dominate the whole thing, but of course, they're excited to tell about it. When I interviewed for this job to be a vice president of Texas A&M University, you know, there were a lot of ways I didn't meet their intended qualifications, but I knew what they were really looking for was a leader. I didn't have a PhD, not an admiral, running a maritime academy, you know, et cetera. But in my final interview with the president of Texas A&M, and he's looking at a stack of papers, and he says, you know, everybody seems to like you, And I just don't understand it. You know, why do you even want to do this job? I don't see university administrator in here anywhere. And I told him, I says, well, sir, you're looking at my professional resume, which is, research and development, space exploration, flight test ops, things like that. But you may have missed my volunteer resume. And I told him, I've been a volunteer in the scouting program virtually my entire adult life. And as a Scoutmaster, I get him as a 5th grader, and I sent him off to college. And I see this now running a university, running a college campus as a natural extension of that lifelong passion to help young people, prepare young people for their lives. And he sat back, he kind of looked at me and he said, I get it. I've got 2 Eagle Scout sons. Like, yes. And, so, here I am interviewing to be a vice president of university, and one of the things that kind of clinched it with the boss was that I was an Eagle Scout and a scouting volunteer because of the passion that I have, that you all have, for our youth and for our country's future, through this program. So is it relevant today? Absolutely. It's relevant to me. And it's certainly relevant to the lives of young people. I know you're recording it, but I'm going to use a minor curse word. We've been through hell the last 3 years, 3.5 years, folks. We really have. With what we've gone through with the global pandemic, with racial unrest, with the national lawsuit, we have been beaten and bludgeoned from every direction. And our young people, and I get them now as new college students that lost so much of their learning and their socialization through their time isolated at home when they're not in school, they're not interacting with people, too much time behind screens, either these kind of screens or even Zoom screens where they're trying to learn and we're trying to teach, but it's not effective and you're not getting the whole education. They've been isolated like that. And I contend now more than ever, our youth are crying out for scouting and our families are crying out for those opportunities to get them in the woods and forcibly unplug them if you need to get them out into the mountains, to get them into wherever you can, to enjoy those things where there's natural consequences to, for getting your rain gear. Well, you get wet. Well, in the, South Texas and Louisiana, you're not going to die of hypothermia more than likely. And really the socialization, and that's what I think is so much of it. In ways, the youth have gone feral because of the lack of the interaction they get and the consequences of working with people, saying something rude to their face instead of typing it anonymously online in some social media format or something like that, and realizing but it's forming again the friendships, the bonds that are, I believe, important for mental health forever. And as I said, right up front, my scouting friends from way back in the day are still some of my best, friends for life. And I want every young person to have that, because I know it gives me a stability. I learned the confidence. I learned the basics of leadership. So as a scout, as a patrol leader, I like to say, when I was the commander of the space station 12 years ago, I had a crew of 6. That just a little bit smaller than a scout patrol. And I learned really all the leadership I needed being a patrol leader, resolving conflicts, planning ahead, meeting schedules, being accountable, being responsible. Now there's a lot more technical stuff involved, of course, with commanding a space station. But when it comes to leadership, and I had an international crew of Russians, a Japanese, and another American, you still, all those things that you learn as a scout with older scouts and adult leaders helping coach you, is their life skills. When I got into the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M University, and I was later a squadron commander there in charge of 40 college students, I thought back to my time as senior patrol leader of my troop of about 42 guys, and how I planned, how I led the other leaders in the troop, how I led my Scoutmaster. And then when I got in commissioned into the Air Force, and I'm dealing with later junior officers and non-commissioned officers and junior enlisted, that still the leadership lessons were all there. They grew, they expanded, but the foundation had been laid, as a teenager. And I've always gone back to those things and cherish those things, as well as love of the natural world, love of our outdoors, care for our planet, and responsible with our resources, clean them outdoor manner, et cetera, et cetera. Those are, good things for us all also. So I think that's probably about enough for my original soliloquy. Wade, you want to tell us about your path?
Well, glad to do that. And that would avoid me having to do what Ben told me to do, which was talk about accountability to a bunch of people who raise their right hand at every meeting and say a scout is trustworthy, loyal, and helpful. But my career is a checkered one. I was not an Eagle Scout. I got to, I think, Star Scout. But I got I have two Eagle sons who each made it to Eagle at least 4 or 5 days before their 18th birthday. And so I have, I'm counting myself as a derivative. My youngest son at his Eagle ceremony was thanking people and finally said, finally, I want to thank my dad. And I'm puffing up a little bit. And he said, I want to thank him for nagging me about my Eagle project. And the crowd sort of chuckles and he goes, no, seriously, every single day. And so that's my contribution to my kids' Eagle careers. But I'm very fortunate to have, when we moved to Austin in '97, moved into a neighborhood that ended up having 3 council chairs in our neighborhood. And we got sucked up into Troop 30 in the Capital Area Council and had some fabulous Scoutmasters. And I learned so much. And my boys, one of them literally, his first camp out was in a fetal position in our front hallway. He now has gone to law school, works for the government, has traveled around the world. He's fearless when it comes to travel. He traveled through Africa on a train where he and his traveling companion were the only white guys on a train going through Tanzania on a couple of days. He kind of snuck into the Congo and Burundi. And I attribute all that to the skills he got and the confidence he got with the Scoutmasters at Philmont and Northern Tier Sea Base. Likewise, my younger son, and similar to Colonel Fossum's experience, went to TCU, had a good but not outstanding record, but was interviewed for a really good job by a guy who'd also gone to TCU. And the question was about his scouting career and what was his project and did he go to Philmont? And so we're big believers in the scouting experience. Ben, I'd be pleased to go through the PowerPoint if you like. I'm a little intimidated by this crowd. There are no rookies here, I see, and I'm supposed to talk about accountability with Dr. Bales, who teaches leadership. And I'm pretty sure that nobody here came to hear from the lawyer. But
Well,
glad to proceed in whatever format you guys would like.
Well, I think you might hit the highlights. Let me, as a transition to that, though, let me say two or three things. One is that like Wade and the Colonel, I get to meet lots of people who are not Scouts, and I get routinely asked twice today why I'm still active in Scouts. And I said, we just exactly like Colonel Fossum said, but I put it not quite as eloquently, that we we try hard to teach these kids something that they didn't know before, hopefully in the outdoors, which I dearly love. But we want to let them fail in a safe place. We want to teach them something, let them fail in a safe place, teach them some leadership, and set them free. And a few years ago, I got to have dinner at Philmont with Secretary Gates, who was probably Colonel Fossum's boss at one time, and probably pal. And he said, the best leadership training he ever got in his life was in Boy Scouts. Wow. And he led the CIA and NSA and the Department of Defense. And he has said, I've heard him say that several times. And but I want to tell all of y'all something, and I want to give it back to Wade, because it's really important that we talk about that. But these youth that we lead, and I'm going to say your fellow scouters here, I will tell you, and I was thrilled, Colonel Fossum, when you start off with it. We can ask any adult kid who was a scout about their scouting experience. And the news Tucker, who's kept our council chairman right now, has some young kids. We're thrilled he's our president. But if you ask any of these adult kids who were scouting, Wade's boys, ask him what they remember scouting, and they may tell you a story about Philmont, and they might tell you a story about Northern Tier, but the second story is darn sure going to be about their leaders, about the men and women who led them. And so, and I will tell you that Wade Cooper and Barry Bales, who've been mentioned several times on this thing, put together, when I was in desperate need of some leadership help here in Capital Area Council, they put together a thing that we call Council Leadership. And they, those meetings had been running 6 or 8, and through their leadership and teaching about leadership, when we all three left that, we were running about 300. And people still talk about that today because it was focused on leadership. And it was Barry and Wade put that together for us. This is a critical time in scouting right now. We have as small as we've been since the 20s, frankly, guys. And our financial position is critical. It is with this team in our area that we will survive. We need to get the message out to scouts. We need to get that to adults, and about how critical this program is. And it's still the best youth program in the country. So that said, each of you have been asked to do a job, and Jeffrey and I have been talking, and he and I are going to have a meeting a little later with some folks. But so let me, I'm serious, guys, about these kiddos. I ask every kid, tell me about, I just was with a young man, a young Eagle Scout in Dallas a couple of days ago, and asked him about his scouting program. His first comment was about his Scoutmaster. It wasn't about Philmont. It was about his Scoutmaster. Your impact is unbelievable. And I know that many of us don't be with scouts much right now, the kids, but this is the backbone that keeps this thing going. So I've said all I'm gonna say. Wade, if you would, maybe you could just hit a few highlights, and let me give myself up, Wade. I did ask Wade. One of the things that we've all run into, we run into scouters who, all scouters do. You're right, Colonel, and Jim Lynch. We like our patches, and Renee's got our NST 7 patch posted. We like all of those things, but we can't like them more than we like the program. We can't like Order of the Era more than we like our youth. And so when we take on these jobs, and when I was council president, I had to encourage some people to do other jobs. So anyway, sorry, Wade. I got lost here. let me stop and turn it back over to you. We've got a while, and then I want to let people ask questions of both of you guys. So
sure. Well, I'm going to forego the PowerPoint and hit a few highlights and ideas. I know that Ben takes scouting very seriously, and he takes this job very seriously, and he has big ambitions for this service area and the job that each of you will do. And I wouldn't have taken this job to talk to anybody about leadership or how to get things done, except I owed Ben several favors, and I'm trying to work some of those off. So please take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm a lawyer, not a professor. I started my job as a managing partner feeling like I was underprepared and behind. And I have been trying to catch up for the last 13 years. And the one thing I feel very seriously about is in a position of leadership, and I try to beat this into my colleagues, we have a responsibility to continue to try to sharpen the axe of leadership and to be learners and to continue to try to participate in what we in the legal profession call continuing legal education about the role of being a leader. And so hopefully I have learned something along the way, and I've got a few comments that I'll make, and maybe they will provoke some thought in you. But again, I'm a learner, not a professor. And I'll leave the professing to the professionals, Dr. Bales. And some of what I've learned from you, perhaps you'll see here. But I want to just quickly remind you of a story I know a bunch of you have heard, which is of the Shackleton expedition in 1914 to go to cross Antarctica and be the first person to do that. He had been on expeditions a couple of times that failed. He almost died, but he was driven, and this is in the early 1900s, he was driven to be a man who brought glory to himself and glory to England. And he raised some money, raised a crew. They went down there, sailed from England right after World War I started, got to Buenos Aires and then to South Georgia Island. There were 28 of them, 27 plus Sir Edward Shackleton, 80 dogs, and they were going to dog sled across Antarctica. He made a mistake as a result of his ambition. He pushed on when he'd been told by the local whaling captains that the ice pack was more congested than they had seen. Nevertheless, he persisted. They got stuck in the ice shortly after he left South Georgia Island, spent months stuck in the ice. Eventually, his ship was crushed, and then it sank. And then they spent 8 months wintering in Antarctica with just their 3 lifeboats, the provisions they had saved, and the dogs. They initially tried to make their way to land in a cache of food that had been left there, and that proved too difficult. And so they ended up having just to endure the winter, hoping that eventually the ice would break up and they'd be able to make it to safety in these 3 lifeboats, each of which were 21, 22 feet in length. And so they endured the winter. Eventually the ice broke up, literally broke up underneath them. They were able over the next 5 days to sail to Elephant Island and got 22 of the 28 of them settled there. And then Shackleton and his captain of the boat, Frank Worsley, set out on an impossible mission to sail 740 miles across the worst seas on Earth, really, in a 22-foot boat and hit a very tiny island, South Georgia Island, and they did that. And the story really is one of the most remarkable stories of leadership and survivorship that you will ever read. And so a lot of what I've come to believe in my professional career, learned from just reading about the adventures of others, and particularly Shackleton, just wondering the little things about what did you say every morning to the 27 other guys there, having led them into this adventure and knowing that you really had odds against you ever getting out of this? How did you keep that group together? How did you inspire them? What did you say every day in the dark of winter when all you could think about was eating and staying warm? And then how did you fill them with the hope and the optimism to take out on this crazy journey? in any event, if you haven't read it, I commend that to you. And I will just tell you, reading inspirational stories, I think, is one of the ways that we who have responsibilities continue to sharpen our own edges. The specific thing that Ben asked me to talk about was how to get things done in a volunteer world. And we face special challenges in the nonprofit world, and particularly when we're trying to coax volunteers to give a little bit more effort. And I'm Ben knows this, I'm a reader, and so I'm going to quote from a few books, but let me just give you a handful of ideas that have struck me over the last 13 or so years trying to lead a group of now almost 500 lawyers, which I don't know if you can imagine a more difficult job than leading lawyers, but that's what I have to do. So number one, if you want to get things done, I think you've got to have a clear and inspiring objective. It's got to be vital. It's got to be concrete. One of the authors whose book I keep coming back to is John Doerr, who's a very prominent venture capitalist on the West Coast. He was with the folks who started Intel, and he learned quite a bit about that from those days. He defines an objective as something that is significant, concrete, action-oriented, and inspiring. And I would say that can be written down in a very few words. He says being able to focus on an objective is really the vaccine against fuzzy thinking. And so I think object number one for us is to have a very clear, concrete, tangible objective. The crew of the Endurance had a very clear objective: get off that ice floe and get home safely. I'm going to talk about General Stanley McChrystal in his book a little bit. In the time period that he was writing about, they had a very clear objective: defeat al-Qaeda and make Iraq safe. That's something you can understand and get behind and write down in one sentence. John Doerr became famous later because he was the venture capitalist who really got Google off and running back in 1999. And Google had a very clear mission: organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. Again, very clear, very concrete, very ambitious, and very inspiring. And I want to quote Dr. Bales, because one of the best things I ever learned about the job of coming up with an inspiring, clear objective, I heard from him 10 or 15 years ago. We were at a council planning session, a bunch of leaders in the council, and he said something that I've stolen countless times. He said, what would it look like if in this initiative, this project, we really knocked it out of the park? What would that look like? Write that down. Imagine that. Write that down. And then he asked the follow-up question: what impact might it have on our council if we knocked it out of the park? And it really was a very simple exercise, but it was very dramatic in causing us to think about the grand scale that we might achieve and the importance of what we might achieve. A very elegant way to think about that, and I've used it countless times. So first step in getting things done, I think, is thinking very clearly about inspiring objectives and then communicating those. Second point I will make, this is a quote from a fellow by the name of James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. A really great book, and I commend it to you. One of the best things I've read in the last, 4 or 5 years, he said, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I think that is hugely important for us as leaders to think about, and particularly in volunteer world and the Boy Scout world. It's how do we keep people on path? We tend to have sort of squishy, lofty objectives but it's not the objective that will motivate people. I think it's the systems we put in place to keep people moving forward. And I would say in my own day job, trying to think about how to keep lawyers moving forward, particularly on the part of their job that doesn't relate to doing client work, is really one of the most challenging things that I have to do. And so I want to focus my remaining time just on the systems that we use to put the objectives into place. As I said, I'm going to mention the book Endurance and Shackleton's Journey. I'm going to mention another book called Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, which one of the most impressive books I've read. McChrystal was, or Bob Gates, who we mentioned earlier, said McChrystal was perhaps the finest warrior and leader of men in combat I ever met. And his book is really a very interesting commentary on all the work that they had to do in Iraq to transform the Joint Special Operating Command into an organization that could deal with Al-Qaeda and this loose new network, very toxic, lethal network. But he says in his book that and Colonel Fossum may want to comment on this, that the JSOC was a traditional military organization, very command and control, very deliberate, focused on planning, not particularly agile, not particularly fast. And so it's a really interesting book. And then finally, the book I mentioned, Measure What Matters by John Doerr, on the concept of objectives and key results. And then finally, Atomic Habits. In addition to clear objective, I think it's important to have what General McChrystal called a shared consciousness and purpose. And one of the things that he focuses on in his book, and I think is important in any organization, is breaking down the silos and making sure the whole organization has the facts that are relevant to the objective, and then shares in the purpose, and breaking down those walls and trying to get everybody on the same team. And he goes into in the book, and it was pretty empowering to me to talk about creating, in their case, a conference call, video call 6 days a week that was mandatory. They never canceled the call. And each of the several governmental agencies, the various groups within the military that were participating, the various governmental entities, non-US entities that were participating, all in the call, all sharing information, all holding each other responsible. And so sort of a deviation from the traditional need to know basis to everybody in the organization needs to have command of the facts and be aligned on the purpose. So and yes, the second thing I would say, if you want to get things done, break down the silos within your organization, try to get the whole group focused on the facts on the ground and get them aligned. And I think in the COVID era, where we're all used to doing calls like this, we're not in person as much as we once were. Trying to break down those silos is even more important. Third thing I'd say is feedback and accountability. On the voyage of the crew from Endeavor, Captain Worley every night, or when possible, would take out his, I think, what's it, a transept, and figure out where they were. And often the news was disappointing. They were drifting with the ice way out of the way. When they finally got the boats in the water, it was difficult frequently to get the readings and plot their longitude and latitude. And frequently the news was bad, but it's the information that they needed to have. John Doerr in his book talks about the objective, which I've mentioned, but also the key results, knowing where you are, plotting your path. McChrystal talked about getting everybody together, holding everybody responsible, knowing if they were making progress. Those are the systems that support your objective and keep you on task. So if you want to if you want to get things done and you fall to the level of the systems, it's important to get some sort of a feedback loop in place to measure progress on a regular basis. Following that, I think the key is learning from that and adapting. And I think in a volunteer organization, we often get a little squishy about performance. And it's a challenge. We don't want to hurt the feelings of our volunteers. Volunteers are precious to us. But in my experience, if you're getting the feedback, you understand whether you're succeeding or not succeeding, and you've got people who are really wed to the mission, they're going to be frustrated if you're not adapting and changing course as you see the results. On the 4 or 5 days that Shackleton and his crew were trying to get to Elephant Island, Shackleton changed their destination 4 times based on the ways they were getting pushed by the currents and the wind and the ice fields that they had to navigate. And I think for all of us on this call, particularly in a volunteer environment, it's different from the military, it's different from the business world, and we really have to treat our volunteers with kid gloves. But I think the failure to learn and adapt, ease people out when they're not getting the job done, change course when that's an objective that we can't get to or it needs to be adjusted, is really one of the most important things we do. Our leader, Mr. Turner, says there's a job in Scouts for everybody. And I think one of the key concepts for us, it's key in the law firm because lawyers are not natural leaders, is trying to find the right people and put them in the right job and stay on the course and get to your objective. So you want to get things done, learn from your feedback loop and adapt in a timely fashion. A couple other concepts and I'll turn it back over to Ben. One of the things I feel strongly about and General McChrystal makes or speaks eloquently about is as we get bigger, and particularly this was true in the law firm, I had to learn to step back and push authority down to the next level. We now are almost 500 lawyers. We have 16 different practice groups. Each of them provide a somewhat unique service and they go to the marketplace somewhat differently. I can't be the boss of all those. I can't lead all those. And so as I have grown in my career and my walk as a leader, one of the most challenging things is learning how to step back and empower the next generation. And I think within your groups, that's one of the key things that we have to learn to do. General McChrystal talks about the concept of leadership being an emergent quality and not trying to be the superhero as the leader, but be a gardener of the ecosystem that you're creating with your teams. And over time, the relationship supporting the frontline leaders, the actual leaders in the groups will emerge. And I think in a volunteer organization like ours, creating the environment where those quiet people who are really good at it stand up, I think is one of the most valuable things you can do. And how many times in our organization have we seen a mom quietly sitting there raising her hand and saying, I'll get that done. And sure enough, she's super busy. She's driving kids. She's running a household. And creating the environment where your emerging leaders can emerge and empowering those people, I think, is one of the superpowers of the leaders in the organization. Next, I will say, one of the things I've come to late in my career is realizing that habits beat motivation every time. And we don't have a lot of rules in our organization, but on the things that are super important, and I would say in our case, that's financial hygiene, we're very militant about that and trying to create good habits because we bill people based on the time we spend on the job. If we don't write our time down, we can't capture it. We can't bill it. If we do a sloppy job around that, people don't like paying the bills. So we're really militant about that. That's a habit that we're really trying to create. And I think as a leader, we can try to motivate, we can give big speeches, but at the end of the day, it's changing behavior and specifically the habits. And so I think being very mindful of where habits exist in the organization, cultivating the good ones, trying to change the bad ones. And I think in my experience, the best way to go at that is peer pressure, getting the important people in your organization to model the good and important habits, and then creating peer pressure around that, because I think it's the key to success. We can give, as I said, all the speeches in the world, but habits are running against you. So I commend the book Atomic Habits to you. One of the great little tidbits, Mr. Clear says, if you improve 1% each day of the year, by the end of the year, you're 37 times better than you were when you started that process. So if you can get 1% a day, you're doing something. And then next to last, I will say care for your people is perhaps the most important thing I've learned in my 13 years. That wasn't something I came into the job really understanding. The captain of the Endurance wrote a follow-on book about his experience with Shackleton. And it was very clear from that book, the thing that he admired about Shackleton was his care for the people under his command. Literally telling stories about when they were on this road, on the path to try to get to South Georgia Island, Shackleton giving his gloves to somebody else who lost some overboard. Another story on one of the failed missions when they were about to starve, trying to find their way back, Shackleton giving his last biscuit to somebody else. A powerful message that maybe the most important job that we have is every day taking care of our people mentally, physically, and I think particularly emotionally. A surprisingly big part of my job is patting our successful lawyers on the back and encouraging them. They seem to need it as much or more than anybody. And I think trying to create opportunities for fellowship and fun, we do that for the Scouts, but doing it for our adult leaders is equally important. And I think in a volunteer world, we have a unique opportunity to tell people they're valuable, to find them a way to feel valuable, to encourage them. And if an hour or two a week, we can make them, provide them a little bit of joy, provide them a sense of worth, they will follow you to the ends of the earth. So taking care of people, I think, may be as important as anything you do. And then finally, I'll end with this. As I was thinking about this and reading these bestsellers, or having read them and going back to reread them, to fulfill my mission as designed by Mr. Turner, it really occurred to me that most all of you have already done all these things. If you have planned a trip to Philmont or a trip to Northern Tier, you had a very clear objective. You and your group had a very clear sense of where you were going and how you were going to get there, how far you were going to go each day. You sat down every day at the end of the trek that day and figured out how far you'd come and whether you were on path or not. You probably had a either formal or informal thorns and roses session where you talked about what went well and what didn't go well, aired the dirty laundry and readjusted accordingly. You probably had to change your route because of a storm, or because you were behind schedule or ahead of schedule. You adjusted. Maybe your crew was tired. You let the boys make as many decisions as they could. You let them take command where you could and encouraged and supported them. But you fostered the idea of a boy-led troop or crew. You made sure that they didn't do anything stupid and get blisters, and you probably ensured that they went to the bathroom, the pilot, co-pilot at least once or twice on their journey, and maybe you snuck in a little prune powder into the oatmeal or something to make sure that they stayed healthy. But you were committed to making sure they had fun, that they got some confidence, and they came home in one piece.
Yeah, Wade, thank you so much. I want to tell all of y'all a story about each of our two guest speakers tonight. And then I'm sure Colonel Fossum didn't even know about this, but the first time I've seen him speak twice before, both times in Austin. One time we brought him in to speak to some people who were significant givers, or we hoped would be significant givers. And I was learning to be merciless about asking for money. And so as we were leaving, everybody's gone. By the way, the colonel was he and John Yates were the last two people to walk out of the room, I think, and I think I did have to lock the door. But I had a couple grab me who had not been involved in scouting in any way, but we just kind of invited them on a fluke. And they grabbed me, and actually the wife grabbed me, and the husband were talking. They said, you know, if that guy Colonel Fossum is representative of Boy Scouts, we want to give. And they gave the most significant gift we had that night, just so you know, Colonel Fossum. Secondly, I want to tell you a story about Wade. Wade and I were really just getting to know each other, and I was pounding on it. You know, I lean on he and Barry Bales unmercifully. And I asked Wade to put on a camp out for our Key 3, our 13 district Key 3. I don't even know if Wade remembers it, but there is a fellow out there. This really is about me telling you that our youth remember you as leaders, but our adult volunteers remember our leaders as well. And there's a fellow we still have in Scouts who was a reluctant Key 3 member, and he's still very active because Wade put on this camp out, brought all the food, brought all the water, and then put on the cotton picking helped with the program. So, and that guy is still involved in scouting in a leadership way because of Wade Cooper. So thank you. By the way, Colonel Fossum, I think my goal, I would have had a very clear goal if I'd gone up to the space station on the Soyuz, and that's to make that thing get me home. I'm not sure how strong a aircraft that was, but anyway, I could go on and on and on, but atomic habits are great. Wade's taught me a bunch. Barry's taught me a bunch. As I say, it's not taken very well, but I appreciate it. I am going to, we're right on 8 o'clock. Does anybody have questions of these two before we? Yes, sir. Go for it.
I just
take as much time as you want, Colonel. I don't care.
Well, and I will stay on if people want to talk. But Wade, I'm glad you mentioned the adults having fun too. Absolutely, that fun, friends, and adventure, and that counts for the adults too. And so I encourage you to, you know, at the unit level, at whatever organizational level you're at, do some things that are actually fun. But it's especially important down in the trenches with the individual units that they get together, have a barbecue. It's not a scouting event. It just happens to be some friends getting in the backyard for a barbecue. So do whatever you want to do, sort of, okay. But I've seen with really good units, the adults are friends. They enjoy being together. Their families get together when it's not just scouting, and so you really have a cohesive thing there. And I'll say, you know, Wade, you've got the structure, you've got the systems and things like that, and what my strong suit is the passion. I believe in this program. This program is changing lives. This program almost certainly saved mine. I'm not joking. And the potential is out there, you know, for all of it. And to hear that our numbers are down to, you know, the lowest in almost 100 years, is heartbreaking, because I know the youth need it. I work with youth. I see them on my campus, and I know how much they need the values of scouting, the structure of scouting, the friendships, the leadership, the mentoring of scouting. So I'm passionate about it because I know it changes lives. I know it saves lives. I know that scouts themselves have saved lives because of the scouting skills that they learn, not just first aid, but also the leadership, looking out for each other. And when a scout comes and says, you know, somebody is in crisis on my campus, because they noticed it, they care, they spoke up, and I can get a crisis counseling team working with that student before something horrible and tragic happens. You know, that the impact is just huge. And in order to sell this, we've got to sell it with the young people, not grumpy old dudes like me, right? And maybe, you know, we can reach some of the parents and potential sponsors and supporters of the program. But to get the youth in, you've got to convince the youth, and you got to convince their parents it's good. We're overcoming, I mean, seismic shifts in negative news, bad news and stuff. And the things, you know, here in my area, my district in Houston, that we worked on was getting lots of pictures of young people, the boys, now the girls. I celebrate this, having fun, cooking, hiking, outdoors, happy, dirty smiles, and things like that, and getting that out there. Do not miss an opportunity for a unit. Push this down to the unit level. When there's a celebration, when there's an Eagle ceremony, when there's a life-saving situation, get it into your local press. The more times you can get those touch points with the positive things. I was with a troop, you know, in Houston. I joined it with my second son. My first one was in a different troop, and the second one had some really bad recruiting years, and they kind of didn't want to recruit because they didn't want to deal with young, young annoying fifth graders and sixth graders. And so we maintained the troop small, no more than 36, and we had 3 patrols, and we had to shut down a patrol, and it really shook up the guys. And we kind of threw down on them and said, you know, you're not going to have a troop to come visit in 5 years. You're not going to have a troop to bring your son back to visit, you know, in 15 or 20 years, and really got everybody involved, got the parents involved with recruiting. I got moms recruiting in parking lots. I got them to put Scout stickers on the window of their cars, and another mom says, "Hey, we just moved here. I saw your Scout sticker. Do you know about a troop?" "Yes, indeed." And here come 2 more boys. So within a year, we stood the 3rd patrol back up because of the outreach. We're sponsored by a community association. They've got a swimming pool, and we set up camp, you know, in the park next to the swimming pool in the summer, and had tents set up, and we had Dutch oven cooking going, and just invited people, put the word out, big signs out, "Hey, you know, troop open house, come on by." And you know, and you'd be amazed at how much different interest you can get when they can actually see it. So if you're sponsored by a church, consider that. You know, different things to do to get the word out there, to let people see Scouts in action. Have them doing the little competitions, have them do a chariot race. You'll repair the lawn later. You know, and those kind of things, just as a way of getting in. Let them see that, you know, the professional adult leaders. So you remove some of those stigmas and scare, you know, and negativity. Let them see the smiling kids that are going to be their kids, like patrol leader or buddy, and incentivize within the units. Bring a buddy to visit a troop meeting, you know, anyway. I'll stop and just offer if anybody's got questions.
Questions, comments? Oh my, I've never seen so many scouters be so quiet.
This is Phil DeRocher from Ruma, Colonel Fossum. I just want to, not so much a comment or anything, but I always take the opportunity. I flew F4s with Eric Bowe.
Oh man.
And, yes, exactly. So, and it's amazing, you know, his journey when he was a brand new lieutenant in the Air Force, he had that goal in front of him, like we see these Eagles kids that are eventually going to be Eagle Scout. He had a clear vision. He wanted to be an astronaut. So as soon as we got to the Philippines in the F4, he was applying for test pilot school even before he qualified for it. You know, getting there, doing it, and watching him achieve his success. For all of us in that squadron, we all took, we reveled in that success with it, and that's the opportunity we also have as scout leaders, is watching the youth under us enjoy the same thing. But give Eric a hard time for me. Tell him Leo DeRocher said howdy. And
Leo, he knew you as Leo or call sign.
Call sign, yeah. So until I got to fly big ugly airplanes, and then it became Phantom Phil. So
before we get off, I want to say, Peter, can you, this is Peter Sargent, who's been gracious to record this. He's going to post it up. You can see in your meeting chat where you can watch this again, or send it to friends and other leaders. I hope you will. This certainly represents the top leadership in NST, but we hope you share it with others. Peter, can you, you got it, well, he's got it posted right here. You don't need, but you're muted, Peter.
It's posted in the chat, and then I'll talk to Renee in the morning and teach him how to pull the attendee list from Zoom.
That'd be great. So we intend to do much more social media than I know how to do, but that's why you have Peter here. So that's clearly where our kids are. So we got to be. That's where we got to be. So comments, thoughts. Colonel Fossum, thank you so much. I know you're way and you've been busy all day. I can't thank you enough for being with us. And Wade, your preparation, thank you so much. You've helped me every time I've been. You never said no to me. So thank you so much. We appreciate it all.
Our youth need scouting. They all need scouting. Our families need scouting. Our communities need scouting. Our companies need scouts with those values. Our country needs scouting. So thank you. Keep leaning in. Keep leaning in. Every one of them's worth it. Thanks.
I'd say we need to leave with that. Thank you so much. Good night, all.
Ben, thank you, Ben.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
thank you all.